Hey, this is Jackson Cooperman, and welcome to the audio commentary track for my short film, WreckVlogs. The original idea for this concept came from a dream I had when I was in high school. It took place out in this abandoned wreck yard for car parts, and there were three guys there. The first guy was holding like some kind of power tool up to the second guy's throat, and then the third guy was recording it on an old VHS camera. And I think when I first had the dream, I didn't really think much of it, but, after, weeks or months later, I thought back to it again and again, and I was like, who are these guys? What are they doing? Why are they doing this? And, I eventually came up with a reason. They were doing it to profit off of it. And so I thought, okay, this must be like some kind of underground snuff video contest or something like that. And as I slowly developed the concept, I thought to myself, what kind of torture would I be willing to put myself through if I needed to win this contest? And I thought, wow, this is actually an interesting idea for a horror movie. So I just kind of took that rough idea and started writing a script from there. And the whole thing just kind of grew off of that initial idea. The original draft of the script was 24 pages, and, I really didn't want to shoot something of that length, because ideally a short script should be around 10 pages, and then that translates to about 10 minutes of screen time. So a 24-minute short film is not really unheard of, but it's hard to keep the audience's attention span for that long, because by the word short, they're expecting just a quick little story. And, at the time I had written it, I said to myself, there's no way I'm going to be able to cut this thing down, because I really believed that every single page I had written was essential to, getting the story across in an effective way. But it wasn't until until I took it into development in my senior year of film school and really worked at it and just rewrote again and again that I, was really able to essentially chisel off a lot of the fat. And I was able to get the final draft of the script down to 12.5 pages.
Demonstrating the highest level of brutality will be awarded the cash prize.
When it came to casting this movie, I'd already worked with Colton and Bradley on my previous film, Hold. As for Nick, he was a newbie when it came to acting. I honestly picked him because I thought he looked like the character Jack. He'd never acted before, but I just went up to him and said, hey, I wrote this thing and I have this part that I think you should play, do you want to read it? And he's like, yeah, sure, And it just kind of went from there, because when I cast a movie, I usually go 60-40 based on the actor's looks instead of their acting background. Because, for me, when I'm watching a film or a show, if the actor playing the character doesn't look the way that the character would really look, I just can't buy it no matter how good an actor they are. So for me, I cast a little bit more based on looks, and then the rest just kind of works itself out as we go.
Okay. Great.
When it came to doing the rehearsals for this movie, the way you usually do rehearsals is the director meets with the whole cast, and you do a full read-through of the script. With the rehearsals for this film, I never had all four of us meet as a group. I met with each actor individually and did 3 private rehearsals, one-on-one. And they actually never worked together until we started shooting. And the reason I did it like that is because I felt it would make the relationship dynamics between the 3 actors sort of mimic the dynamics between the characters in the film. Because if you think about this story, each character is kind of experiencing all this from their own perspective, and each person has secrets or specific motives that they, are keeping to themselves. So like when I met with Colton, we were talking about Todd and who he is as a character, and where he came from and what he ultimately wants. And we eventually came up with this question. What if Todd's true motive is that he's using Jack and Lance to win, and he's planning on stealing all the prize money for himself? And I was like, wow, this is something I didn't even think about when I was writing the script, but maybe, it's what was really going to happen all along. So then me and Colton decide to roll with this idea, but we don't tell Bradley or Nick about it. So when we get to set, Colton is acting this direction, and, Bradley and Nick don't know about it, only I know about it. And that throws Bradley and Nick off and gives a more realistic dynamic by keeping the actors in the dark about what the other guy's direction is, just like the characters in the story are in the dark about what the other guy's intention is. The idea to do these flashbacks came very late in the writing process. The way I'd originally written it was, I had the opening flashback where, they're all in the apartment watching the instruction video, and then we cut back to the WreckVlog scene, and the whole thing was written as a 7-8 page unbroken sequence. And working with it, I felt like it created two problems. One being that the sequence would get tedious at 7 minutes, because, it needed a break in the tension. And two, I felt like we as the viewer really needed to kind of understand why these guys are doing all this in the first place. We needed to understand why they need this money so bad, and basically why they're putting themselves through this. And I felt, if we're not given a reason for their motivations, it's really easy to kind of say as the viewer, like, oh, who in the world would put themselves through this in the first place? I would never do this. But once we know where the characters are coming from, and we understand their situations, we can suddenly relate to them, and we can kind of ask ourselves if we do it. Like, if I'm gonna be evicted, or if I have to pay for this funeral and I have to come up with the money, but all I have to do is put myself through a little torture to get it. Like, maybe now it doesn't seem so crazy anymore. When I look back on the film, I really wish I had more screen time dedicated to delving into these characters' backgrounds and, who they are. But, writing a short film, I think, is much harder than writing a feature, because with a short, you barely have any time to tell the story. You really have to skip through some stuff, just to, because of time constraints. And with this script, I barely had enough time to lay the concept down and, explain everything and, just get all the scenes of action down. And, I really wish I just had more time to examine all these characters' backgrounds and really delve more into who they are. This severed finger effect was completely done as a practical effect. What we did was we removed the actual blade from the box cutter and replaced it with a cardboard replica. So, what you see in the film is always a fake blade. And when it came time to do the slicing through the finger effect, we cut out a small ridge from the cardboard near the tip of the blade, and we just laid it right on top of Nick's finger. And then it gives off the illusion that it's going through his finger. Then, you just add a little fake blood and some well-timed sound effects in post, and boom, you're done. And for the split seconds that we see it in the film, it actually looks pretty realistic. The sound design for the film was by far the most tedious part of post-production, because, bad sound is usually a very common thing when it comes to low-budget student projects like this. And if the sound isn't good, it can really drag down the quality of the film. And not just on a technical level, but on a narrative level as well, because a movie is supposed to be, spellbinding experience for the audience. The whole goal of filmmaking is to make the audience forget that, they're watching a movie. And you can only really pull that off if the film's elements are flawless. You have to have a compelling story, sure, but above that, you have to have flawless shots, editing, sound design, sound effects, And if one sound or one little note is off, even by a margin, you'd be really surprised how fast an audience will lose interest in the movie. Your job as an editor is to play back the same 2 seconds of movie 60, 70, 80 times until you get it just right. So, it's a very, very tedious job.
Screwed it up. Todd, come on. What else did you want us to do? I wanted you to try harder.
Now, in this next scene, where Jack goes after Todd in the parking lot, it was the last day of shooting. We got to set, and we had 30 minutes left to shoot the parking lot before, we had to wrap. And we had about 12 shots we needed to get, but I decided last minute that we should just combine everything into one continuous take, because otherwise we wouldn't have had enough time to get everything. So I wasn't really sure what I wanted the shot to look like, but my director of photography took about 4 takes, and it just wasn't what I wanted, But I wasn't really sure what I wanted. So that's when I jumped in, and I operated the camera myself. And I did about 5 more takes, and I just kind of felt it out as I went, until I got what I needed. But that's what happens on set sometimes, you just have to sometimes jump in and let the whole thing just kind of work itself out as you go, and just kind of, feel it as you're going. The only real problem that I have with the ending is how Lance kind of inexplicably goes along with Jack's plan without, much of a fight. And I originally wanted to extend that scene in the parking lot and give Jack and Lance more of an argument about the whole thing, but we all felt that it would ultimately just ruin the pacing of the narrative. But beyond that, my whole goal with this film was to show these events from 3 different perspectives. In the beginning, I wanted it to focus mostly on how Jack and Lance feel. How, Jack is just constantly suffering during this whole deal, and Lance is the one who, has to inflict this terrible thing on a really close friend. And Todd, for most of the film, is just this evil figure. He's just evil personified. And I wanted us to be on Jack's side all throughout this film, but then at the end, I wanted to switch over to Todd, and I wanted us to see him as a human being for the first time. Because, he was really hard on them in the film, but he had his reasons. And by the end, although it makes us happy to see Jack get his revenge, kind of, I wanted the viewer to more so feel helpless and feel ultimately sorry for Todd.
Not, we're in this together. We're definitely gonna.
The real core idea behind WreckVlogs is that it's a metaphor for the film industry. Its subtext is how actors in a movie usually feel like they're on the hot seat and they're undergoing this torture of, having to do take after take and not mess up. And directors are sometimes interpreted as these tyrants that, relentlessly bark all these orders at people. And then the crew members have to obey the director's orders, and inflict the torture on the actor of making them sit there for an hour while they're, setting up a camera or lighting a shot or whatever else they have to do. So once you think about how the concept translates to the reality of how filmmaking actually works, it makes the whole idea behind WreckVlogs, all the more interesting. I plan on getting WreckVlogs made into a feature-length film in the future. I've got a 100-page screenplay that I've written the concept into, And, I'm using the same strategy that James Wan and Lee Winnell used when they made Saw. What they did was they filmed a 10-minute short just to, demonstrate their concept, and they used it to help them pitch the feature script. And my whole purpose for making this short film was the exact same thing, to, put the concept of WreckVlogs on film and get it seen by audiences, and, hopefully build up some hype about this idea, and try to gain enough interest from horror fans so we can see a feature-length version. And I've written a sequel to this short film as well, that I think really turns the concept on its head. And if my ultimate plan doesn't work out, the sequel is going to be my fallback. So if we don't get a feature version of this concept, I'll make the sequel instead.